Welcome to our lecture series on Wednesday. And I'm really excited today because I didn't have to prepare an opening. I didn't have to prepare an introduction because we have a very special lecture tonight by KieranTimberlake, as you can see. And I want to ask Dean Fritz to come up here and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Rosanna, and good evening, all. With tonight's lecture, we're making a bit of history, having designed the first new building for the Weitzman School, or as it was once called, the Graduate School of Fine Arts, in nearly 60 years. If you're wondering, Meyerson Hall was the building that was built 60 years ago and opened in 1967. But just across the street, Stephen Kieran and James Timberlake are here to talk about their firm's work. They're not across the street, they're here. But the new building, Stuart Weitzman Hall, is across the street. I think it's about the first time in decades that a graduate of our school who has designed a building for Penn is speaking about their work. And I think the last occasion that occurred may have been the new ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, which was located here and then moved to its current location in 1990. The speaker then, architect Adele Santos, actually graduated from our planning program, not architecture, but she is an architect. So that's why she designed the ICA. The relationship between KieranTimberlake and Penn is a special one. KT has employed our graduates. The firm has been really supportive of the school in many ways. Steve and James have both taught in the graduate architecture program, and they're back this semester after a hiatus. So tonight's event is also a bit of a homecoming. My relationship with Steve and James is also a special one. There's people that you meet in your life that are very special to you, but you don't exactly know when you met. We were students at the same time. I was in the landscape architecture department, landscape architecture and regional planning at the time. They were in architecture. We might have met at happy hour. Might. We all three have long affiliations with the American Academy in Rome. We might have met in Rome or at an Academy event. And by the way, something occurred to me just walking through Stuart Weitzman Hall. There's a lot of the American Academy there. There's a lot of bringing artists together with other disciplines. That's really special at the American Academy. I know it wasn't at Texas, although James taught at UT Austin several decades before I did, but there was an overlap in Texas. I know I became a fan of their work, but also their writing, and especially their 2003 book, Refabricating Architecture, which offered new ways for architects and others to think about the building and construction process. It was really a landmark book, and I began to appreciate Steve and James as reflective practitioners and also voices for architecture and the future of architecture. Working with Steve and his team on Weitzman Hall these past few years has given me a deeper appreciation for what he and James have built. And I don't mean only the completed project, but also the firm's values. Now, you might understand that I serve as the co-chair of Penn's Design Review Committee, which advises the university on capital projects. And in that role, I interact with a lot of architects, and KieranTimberlake stands out in many respects. Research is at the heart of the firm's work, just as it is here at Penn. KieranTimberlake doesn't simply embrace technology, they pioneer it. But in their hands, technology is always in the service of design, making buildings not just more efficient, but also more humane. And I'm thinking here of the tools that KieranTimberlake have developed for the profession, like Telly, the life cycle assessment for app for Revit, and so on. Climate issues have long been a priority at KieranTimberlake, as they have for the Weitzman School. It's actually, Penn is where the first Earth Day began back in 1970, actually in this space right here is where it kicked off. And I know that Steve and James share our commitment to being good stewards of the planet Earth. Today, advancing energy and climate solutions and designing healthier cities are cornerstones for our school's strategic framework. So what makes KieranTimberlake building special? Along with efficiency, I would add beauty, elegance, restraint, and honesty. Now more than ever, qualities that are especially precious. I'm not going to recite their biographies because you can easily find those online. Suffice to say, James and Steve have received about every honor, probably every honor given to American architects. The firm has received over 300 citations of excellence, and their portfolio is a who's who of prominent cultural and business institution. The U.S. Embassy in London, the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., the Congregation Rudolph Salome here in Philadelphia, and those are just their built works, a few of their most recent built works. So a bit of advice in closing. If you're an architecture student, and this is mainly for the students, the next happy hour is going to be the Lunar New Year, so there'll be dragons and all kinds. The next happy hour without dragons. If you're an architecture student, introduce yourself to a city planning or landscape architecture student. Because in 50 years, you could be standing here introducing those folks. So with that, let's give a warm welcome to Steve and Kieran, James Timberlake.
Good evening, everybody. It's indeed a pleasure to be here back in our graduate school alma mater, and to Roshana and to Fritz for that wonderful introduction. Many, many thanks. That was very gracious. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know us, I'm James Timberlake, and this is Steve and Kieran. And we are going to share this lecture. I'm going to open, and we will show you several projects, that we want to share with you that are in the contemporary half of our career. We now have been partners for over 42 years since leaving Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's office, and have enjoyed the luxury of working together, and the outcomes that we have. I think it is important to also thank Roshana and Fritz for inviting us back to teach here as professors of practice. We taught here up until about 10 years ago and had an enjoyable time with a deeply embedded research studio that took over 150 students to Dhaka and Bangladesh and India over the years to study water and climate and the impacts on housing and other impacts on human life. And we still have students that reach back to us to talk about how formative that studio was, and we hope that over the course of this semester and next year's spring semester that we can be equally formative with the students that we have. So without further ado, you know, this is begins the sort of contemporary half of the 42 years. This is now 17 years ago, believe it or not, in New York at MoMA with the cellophane house proposition that Steve and I and the firm worked on. And I think that's the other thing, just before I go any further about our work, is that it couldn't have been done with without the help of all the contributors that have come through our office. Several of them are here. I see familiar faces. We are not about singular intelligence. We're very much about collective intelligence and very much about a collaborative environment that everybody participates in. And so the work that you're going to see here, including Cellophane House, you know, doesn't have the hands of just two people on it, but has the hands of tens, if not hundreds of people on it, you know, depending upon the scale of the project going forward. But this was a proposition as part of Home Delivery, a show at MoMA in 2008, you know, where the Cellophane House was proposed to be delivered on site and up by a certain date, be on site for about 6 months, and then have to be taken down. And we had very limited amounts of time at either end. And following on our book, Refabricating Architecture, which was really inspired by Loblolly House, a house for Barbara, Kieran, and Stephen Kieran in rural southern Maryland? Yeah, sorry. I forget. I haven't been there in a while. He hasn't invited me in a while, so I'll have to go back and check out the state, I guess. But you know, this was a provocative proposition about off-site construction that was then chronicled, first chronicled in Refabricating Architecture, but then carried forward with Cellophane House. And in that, embedded in that, and what we hope to show throughout the work today is really some of the depth, but a snippet of some of the holistic thinking that we do when we're creating architecture for our clients. And in this particular case, this was a chart that we were trying to unpack Loblolly House about the carbon recovery through the materiality and the idea that through either reuse or recycling, you know, a vast majority of carbon could be recovered. And in Cellophane House's case, it was almost 99% of the carbon in that particular building could be recovered through either reuse or reimagination. And that became a profound aspect of our thinking about any project, whether it was for Penn at Weitzman or for NYU or for some of the other projects that you'll see in a minute. And therefore, you know, the firm obviously has been widely published. You know, in this particular case, Metropolis, you know, had an article that was really founded after we moved into our new building, our new old building at Ortlieb's, which you'll see in just a minute. You know, and they put this weather vane that's on our roof on the cover, you know, because that's really where the game changing is occurring, is in the seams of all of the alchemy that we have as architects to work with to make our projects. You know, the idea that it's transformative architecture really comes out of the hard work that we and our consultants all do, but it comes with because we establish goals for this work, and that we establish goals for its outcome, and that we strive very deeply to achieve those goals and those outcomes, and have those buildings perform time after time, year after year, and that we think that the architecture is not transient, but something to be around for a long time. We chronicle our work, we share our work, we publish widely. We have written hundreds of articles, maybe not hundreds, maybe I should back off from the hundreds, but tens of articles, but maybe 100 of our articles or more with the aegis of some of the people in the office as well. And how that happens is through a studio that, in this particular case at Ortlieb's, a reimagined bottling plant that was originally designed in the late 1940s for Ortlieb's brewery in Northern Liberties. It's become a platform for critical thinking, collaboration, making, research, and investigation. Our shop is on the ground floor so that we can share with what is going on in the office with the neighborhood. And it very much becomes part of the engine of the decision-making and the creativity that we use throughout. We use a variety of tools. We imagine those tools. We investigate and invent those tools. And then we try to share those tools widely with, the profession as well. Many of those projects have led us far and wide in the world. In this particular case, in India, creating Ideal Choice Homes, India Concept House that is being prototyped here in Ahmedabad. It still exists as a proposition for helping the Indian middle class and growing the housing for that particular country. We're still waiting for the right developer to come along that can help us do that. Likewise, with Penn, with UNICEF, and with several other partners, we studied the problem of the gur in Mongolia, the whole notion that the way people live in other climes and other climates really involve practices that we don't really understand here, but we do know that they're contributing to health issues, respiratory problems, and so forth. And so the gur in this particular case was really looked at in how to unpack that while maintaining the form and retaining the meaning of that house shape and that form of living. We could get better ventilation in the gur and allow people to have healthy and longer lives. Lastly, the arc of our work, encompasses everything from, planning to private houses to work for the U.S. government and the Department of State. But the vast majority of our work over the years since leaving Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's office in 1984 has really been around the college and university arena and use. And we've done almost every college and university building on a campus. In this particular case, one of our first architectural record covers that we ever had was of our project at Berkeley College at Yale, showing one of the students in a sitting niche that was a found place that Steve and team discovered while they were renovating and renewing Berkeley College. And beyond that little portal that's open there, that little window into a different future or a different existence, was a series of panels around a wooden, vast dining hall at Yale, one of the college dining hall houses. And the team had the prescience in the renewal to open up one of the panels in that, to allow that to be a door portal to be opened and closed, to have a glimpse into what once were kind of secret worlds, but now in a renewed world of openness and diversity and inclusion, very much a world that needed to be shared. So without further ado, we have 5 projects that we want to take you through that are relatively contemporary in nature. Several of them involve the work that we do in the renewal arena. And then some of them will show some of the new work as well. Without further ado, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. And,
You can hold your applause to the end.
yeah.
If you want to applaud then. So.
We're going to begin across the street. And this has been, the commission as an architect, most of us wait for and never get, to go back to your alma mater and the place where you began your passage through architecture and get to do a new, in this case, half new, half old project. So hugely meaningful to James and I to have this opportunity. We're very thankful for Fritz ultimately, for granting us the opportunity and figuring out how to make it happen and then making it happen, which is so difficult for design schools. It is so difficult. We just don't have the resources, and somehow this one happened. And so very grateful for it. The old Morgan building in the foreground, 1892 Cope and Stewartson building, a very admired Philadelphia predecessor firm. Lots of buildings around the city. They were not Penn alum. Penn didn't really exist as a design school for them. They went to school overseas in France at the Beaux-Arts, the École des Beaux-Arts. So a fine old building that was in pretty sad shape, frankly, at the moment that we began work on it. And so the project is very much a renewal project. Dominique Hawkins is here in the audience, our partner from Preservation Design Partnership on everything in this. And so it's half new and half old, roughly about the same. You can see here the restoration of the original entry of Morgan Hall in the foreground and the creation of a second entry off of Smith Walk. The building, when it came into existence, had virtually nothing behind it, and it fronted onto 34th Street. Everything that we know as Penn beyond to the east today didn't exist. So part of what we did here was create a second entrance off of Smith Walk, acknowledging the later history of Penn and its development to the east, and providing a second passage into the building. It's a pivotal location for the School of Design. It's kind of the apex of the triangle between this building, the Fisher Fine Arts Library, and across the street now the new Weitzman Hall, together spanning 34th Street. They are our campus of 3 buildings. The planning strategies were pretty simple. We sought in the old building to not put things into it that couldn't be done to it without real, almost violent damage to it. For instance, putting an elevator into a building like that is an extraordinary act. We found a way to not do it. And those of you that have worked in old buildings, when you put them in, you see how much has to be taken out of a building to put something like that in. So the new building did all the things that the old building couldn't do well. It provided accessibility from the outside, accessibility from the inside to everything. It accommodated all of the fine arts studios, which require ventilation that the old building just couldn't do. So that was the first strategy, was let each do what it can do the best and let them support and frame each other. So the classrooms and installation lab in the floor plan on the left were things the old building could do. We discovered an attic, and that I'll share with you in a moment, that was something else the old building could contribute. The plan is, the new entry is between the new and old building, deliberately so. And it provides access into both and refronts the whole building on that first floor plan toward Smith Walk. But the two axes, if you look at them, if you enter the Morgan building, you can see straight through windows beyond even the new building. That's one axis. And it intersects another axis coming in off of Smith Walk that goes straight through the new building. And they intersect together and join and fuse new and old. This is a building really full of life. Fritz alluded to it. It's got all of the School of Design represented in it. It certainly has the fine arts program. There are research centers in it. There's a landscape studio up on the 4th floor. We're going to get that for the architects one of these days, after the building gets a little older and Fritz lets us messy architects into it. But it's just full of commingling of all the life of the school, and the way you move into, through, and around the building creates those encounters that are at the heart of what a design education can and should be. Just a few images of it. We don't have professional photography yet, just dedicated, as most of you know, and hopefully enjoyed the event last week. The seam in between the new and old buildings, you can see on the left side, the old wall of Morgan Hall, part of it now inside, part of it outside. And you can see from the new building, a new stair coming down into the 3rd floor studio space. This image is really emblematic of everything we believe about work in old buildings. They have to be made new again, and they have to be full of life for an old building to go forward and have a chance at a long life. And you can see the dialogue we engage in between the new and old. You can see the old wall to the right of Morgan, the old eave, and the new mall of the new building directly opposite it. And in every detail of the building, we've sought this engagement, the simultaneous presence of new and old. There was an attic atop the Morgan building. You had to enter it through a hatch. We took the attic floor out and opened it up to the 3rd level of the building to provide a new open studio space with spectacular volume to it that kind of celebrates the whole of what the Morgan building had. And it certainly had great bones. It's been around for 134 years, and we hope to give it another jolt of maybe another 70 years, 60, 70 years at least. But you can see that, again, the connection between new and old in this view of a crit space, something this building lacks, and they're everywhere in that building. We tuck them in at every seam possible. This is a detail I personally love, the cast iron columns in the building. It was a pre-steel building, didn't really have steel at that point in time, so it's cast iron. Engineers couldn't calculate it. They weren't sure that it would work and couldn't really certify the structure. So we cradled the old structure. You can see there's a cast iron column in the middle there. We cradled it in a new steel column, revealing the old at the same time that you could see the new. just some additional crit spaces. Everything, underneath the stair becomes a purpose-designed crit space. Again, not finished at this point in time, but you can see some of the conversation we started to have between our exterior wall and the historic wall. We certainly took proportional systems out of the historic wall. We took some compositional systems out of them, but developed a new loft building. Clear span, 40-foot wide, new addition, no columns inside it, and articulated it as as a modern contemporary curtain wall, but using some of the vertical proportioning systems of the original building. A second project for the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. This is located on Capitol Hill, just behind the U.S. Capitol, 2 blocks away from the Capitol. Extraordinarily difficult site, no less than 9 different authorities having jurisdiction over the preservation of that National Historic Landmark. Very meaningful to us. It was designed by Paul Cray, one of Penn's most legendary teachers, who arrived here from France and in the early 20th century and became a much beloved, for decades and decades, professor in the school, then the School of Fine Arts. And he was notably Louis Kahn's teacher, and Louis Kahn worked for him, and we have a drawing that Kahn did of this building while working for Paul Cray. So very, very meaningful project for us. It is also an extraordinary landmark, not just a memorial, but a living memorial to William Shakespeare and to his extraordinary legacy that he's left us of insight into what we crazy humans are, frankly. And this is a memorial to that contribution to our culture. One of the things Kahn did get from Cray was an appreciation of great rooms. And his architecture was an architecture of rooms. He got a lot of that from Paul Cray. This is an architecture of rooms. 3 great rooms: the reading room, the exhibition hall, the theater, a 4th more minor one, the founder's room. But it's not really very much about the connections and circulation between them. It's about room making. And you can see that very much making its way from Kahn's teacher, Paul Cray, into his own work in a very different way, obviously. They're remarkable halls. Elizabethan Tudor of the time, so to speak, that the memorial is representing, that Shakespeare lived in. You can see the library on the right, the exhibition hall on the left, and the theater here, all evocative again of the time of William Shakespeare. For us, oftentimes, the great power of design starts from constraints, things you have to do. And the thing that really can become transcendent in a project like this is turning things you have to do, like make a building that is virtually totally inaccessible, 9 or 10 different levels being negotiated here in red, to make it totally accessible. And not because we have to do it, but because by doing it, we can do something really transformative that becomes a genesis for a design idea that can run through the whole building. The client for this wanted to take that mausoleum-like building and literally turn it inside out, to take something that was standoffish. As they once put it to us, they weren't sure whether or not it was a bank let alone an accessible cultural asset. So they asked us to flip it on its heels and make it accessible to all emotionally, not just physically. And we began, as we always do, by looking at the artifact, in this case, that we're working with, the historic building. And it was an architecture of great rooms. We added 4 more. 2 galleries that you can see inside the building, and 2 landscape rooms at the east and west sides of the building. And Olin was our extraordinary partner in this as a landscape architect, and we worked hand in glove with them to make the whole of this a landscape. The inside spaces are a landscape with great rooms, and the outside spaces are the same. The idea that came out of the accessibility problem was the only way we could solve it was by getting down to the lowest level of the building, where we could allow everybody to come in. And those sunken gardens that you saw in the prior view are part of that. So basically the project is a 360-foot long incision in the earth, block to block, between 2nd and 3rd Streets in Washington, D.C., that brings you down from the adjoining streets, the numbered streets of the city, the day-to-day life of the city, into this formerly off-putting building. It was a tour de force, for sure. We had to take the terrace apart and engage in something of a big dig of our own right underneath it. The supporting design to enable the construction was more complex and difficult to do than the new structure that we ultimately inserted to hold the building up over time. But all of that is in the purview of what we need to do to make something like this happen. We need to understand it and engage in it and develop it. So we literally built a building under a building. It's the first time I think we've ever done an addition under a building, but that's what it is. It's an addition underneath the building. We didn't have any headroom to work with, so all the mechanical systems had to be below the grade level of the building. And this is the result, seen from the corner of 2nd Street and East Capitol Street with the Library of Congress immediately to the right. The idea was come in through a landscape, a room that you can walk around on all the sides and gently descend from the city into the new garden, through the garden, past the reflection of the garden, and into the new hall below. And the big architectural move in this was the 360-foot long concrete wall that you can see in the background here. That's the only facade of the building, in a way, is that concrete wall holding back the earth. We engaged in creating a millwork, a wooden jewel box in the middle of it, a treasure box that contains the Shakespeare Exhibition Hall, including the world's largest collection by far of first folios. About 1/3 of them exist here, 82 of them are in this room, this treasure box in the middle of it. We really detail everything in our buildings to the nines. We sweat every detail, not just from, we begin with great, strong conception, but never quit and just keep going and refine and refine and refine. And you can see some of it in the millwork detailing here, evocative of some of the spines of books in the library, but we take huge pride in that and spend huge amounts of our time and energy with craftspeople getting to those types of results. The Shakespeare Exhibition Hall is inside that wooden treasure box. You can see it here. And then the garden on the opposite side, you can get some sense of how this engages the city, how you can move down from the city coming from lots of different directions, work your way around a beautiful garden that is a tapestry of all the plants that Shakespeare references, dozens upon dozens of them in his works. He was a huge lover of nature. And wrap your way around that down into the interior of the building. And this was just opened about a year and a half ago. And you can see its position here in the city, with the Capitol in the distance behind us. And it stands to us as fundamentally about emotional access as well as physical access to an institution that didn't have it. And we turned that institution literally on its head, opened it out to a public that it was originally never intended to do, designed as a research library.
So from Washington, D.C. to London, we'll show you the embassies. We moved from renewal to some new projects. Completed in 2018, this 500,000 square foot building won through a competition, was replacing the Saarinen designed embassy completed in the early 1960s in Mayfair. And, this new project, after looking at over 45 sites around the City of London, landed in an area called Wandsworth Nine Elms, which is between Wandsworth and Battersea along the Thames, with a glimpse toward the Houses of Parliament, which you can see in this aerial view in the near distance. The ultimate master plan for this, after several years of pre-planning before we had won the competition, but then developed during the first year and a half after we had won the competition, working with 5 other development teams in the Wandsworth Nine Elms area, ended up with a master plan for the renewal of Wandsworth along Nine Elms Lane. And you can see Nine Elms Lane kind of winding its way through here. I'm going to try to use, which one's the
Red.
The red? Where's the red? Show me the red. Forget it. So Nine Elms Lane snakes along the river, sort of parallel. That one? No, that's not it. Okay, there we go. You see that? Okay, here's Nine Elms. That way. There's the Thames. There's Pimlico across the way. Wandsworth is down here as well. And then this railway viaduct, which ends up at one of the major London stations, boundaries the south edge of the overall site here. And there were a series of 5 development projects proposed by developers and many other architects around the idea that renewing Nine Elms Lane and the renewal of the Battersea Power Station into a mixed-use development with housing around it would form the nature of a new neighborhood in London with approximately about 25,000 new houses or flats to live in a variety of scales of buildings, with the embassy in this particular case sitting as the sort of pendant in the necklace along the river, right in the center of all of that. As part of the planning, there was a major greenway that was also pedestrian greenway that followed the midline of the site behind our Nine Elms site here in the round, a 4.5 acre site that really was exposed at the north toward the river, toward Pimlico, this being cardinal due north is straight up here. And that became part of the analysis and organization of the building, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But here's a completed view. Pimlico is off to the left, Nine Elms all the way along, and in the foreground here with our park surrounding the London Embassy Cube. So this is a bit of a flyby that takes you from east on the river, past the Houses of Parliament, toward the Nine Elms development. You can see the breadth of, after you pass MI6, of course, you can see the breadth of some of the housing and development that we did not have anything to do with in their final designs that were organized around this embassy site. So the embassy, when announced, becomes this catalyst in many of these capitals and many of these places around the world. And that's true of not only the US Embassy, but it's true of the Embassy for People's Republic of China. It's true of some of the, obviously, major superpowers, around the world that, these become sort of very important sort of cultural moments in the making of a city and a catalyst for renewal as well. We embedded this building because of the constraints for setbacks and height. We had to design within what was called a kind of iceberg of a volume. So the building had to fit within that and not peek out, because they did not want to see this building from the Houses of Parliament, believe it or not. And why did they do that? Because the Houses of Parliament, being a very high cultural icon in London and UK architecture, really the preservation world has been preserving the general scale around the Houses of Parliament along the Thames in that particular area. So we were able to get additional height here because we were partially screened by a building in between us and the Houses of Parliament. But by embedding this into the garden, we then wrapped those gardens all the way around the building, allowing the setback to be basically seamless without walls, and allowing the public to actually enter onto the embassy grounds and come around the building much closer than we would if we had just pushed everybody out to the edges with fences and barriers. There's still security elements around the project that protect the building from attack. But they're embedded within that landscape that Olin was a strong collaborator and conceptualizer with us on the site. When Steve and I sat down with Laurie Olin after gaining the brief, after a couple of our meetings in London, we began to talk about how that greenway and how the relationship to the river and those strands could be then drawn up into the building as a kind of locus for this particular neighborhood. The cube sits in the middle, and what we ended up deciding to do, because this is a closed building, is bringing the landscape up and in and throughout the building through 6 gardens, 3 of which open to the outside, which you'll see in a minute, and 3 of which are enclosed on the interior, but they all have real plants in them, and they form part of the pathway through the building to get up and down through the building, because they engage major stairs at each of those junctures throughout the building. The building itself is basically defined by these 5 or 6 elements. The landscape and the site, the structure that organizes the building, the systems within that building, which are very much, a part of serving the building throughout the day with 800 people in this particular structure. The cube of glass that surrounds that, that was decided upon because of the amount of natural daylight that we wanted to bring into the building. And then the outer scrim, which I'll unpack for you in just a moment, made of ETFE and a series of metal elements, and then the gardens that are embedded within the cube, all wound together. it was an important part of the brief that this building lead in its sustainability goals. And one of the ways that we got there with our research team and our consultants, Arup and others, is really unpacking the totality of the systems and how they integrated with one another and how they served one another and became the backbone and the backup to one another, including managing water, managing both on-site and off-grid electricity, some of which was generated by the building, but much of it generated by a combined heating and power plant that also turned this building into a district energy building, i.e. contributing potential power to the rest of the development in the neighborhood. Doing diagrams like this and unpacking the site and then organizing the building in a very compact, efficient cube, oriented due north, south, east, and west, made for the most sustainable and most efficient structure you could put on this site relative to not only long-term use, but also in terms of its building performance. As we got into that, obviously the outer envelope became an important part of the expression of this building, but also in terms of the management of the building itself. And we knew we had those two layers, the glass and the scrim on the structure. But part of the question was how to array it, and how did it become something that was defining overall to the whole building and not just be a kind of response to the east side, the south side, the west side, and the north side, but very much about the kind of holistic response as part of the messaging of the building, but also the overall performance. So there's an outer glass wall that then the ETFEs tensioned on struts off of that outer glass wall to allow for a building management unit to make its way up and down in between the glass and the ETFE to not only maintain it, but clean the glass and the ETFE. We began in our office, in this case at the Calla Hill office, which we moved from in 2014, where we also had a research space, but we built a glass analyzing embedment a rack that our research group built. And we took that up on the roof, and then we gathered all of the layups of the glass, because the glass layup on this building is multiple layers of glass. And if you get the wrong kind of glass, that glass can then not be as transparent as we had desired it to be. But it involved, inner layers and other kinds of elements in it as well. And so we were testing here some of that transparency in real time with the light. And while we were doing that, we began to model the scrim on the outside of the building. And the way we did that was first through, some hand sketching of the idea, but then eventually immediately turned to kind of real-time modeling, both in 3 dimensions and in the BIM model, but also in a tactile model such as this, where we actually built a cage and used a kind of nylon scrim and tensioned that to understand what starts to happen with a tension form like that, and how we could manipulate that form into the desired outcome that we wanted to imagine. We then printed a series of these on our printer and applied them over a flat facade to understand the scale of those scrims and how much light they were actually helping to filter or modify. This scrim, this ETFE scrim, has a frit on it, which helps to manage the solar insulation coming into the glass. And it also provides for some visual obscuring at the lower levels of the panels as well. And so getting them right so that we could also have framed views out of the glass became important, while also managing the total solar insulation on the building. We then obviously built a mock-up in York, Pennsylvania, and this was part of the curtain wall mock-up, and tested for pressurization, wind, rain, and its appearance. And then as the building was going up, one wonders how you put a scrim on the building. You get basically steeplejacks and riggers, which were hired by the CM in this particular case. And the struts are then put on the exterior cube and attached. They were thermally broken. And then the scrim is draped and tensioned over the top of those framing members, forming a variety of patterns, whether you're looking up through the building or whether you're aside the building. It becomes very much a part of the defining nature of the exterior facade and the presence on the London skyline. During certain days when it's overcast and rainy in London, obviously it looks very silvery and gray like this, but in the late afternoon, there are moments when the sun comes below those clouds and it's either rising in the morning or late in the afternoon, the building turns golden. And I think one of the things that Steve and I learned about, having been here at Penn following on Khan's death, was really about the fundamental nature of light and how that can modify not only our interiors, but our exteriors of our buildings, and the fundamental nature of time associated with light and how that modifies our appreciation of our buildings going forward. Inside, there's on the ground floor, there's a public way, a main lobby with the Great Seal in this particular case. On the west side of the building, the consular lobby with Rachel Whitread, flat-packed American house sculpture applied to the wall. This is the point of entry for anybody coming there to get their visas or new passports, and you get a number, and then you go upstairs to the consular lobby, consular area, which I'm not going to show you, but it very much is a part of the kind of sequencing of experience that people have when they come to a building such as this. If you're working there, you have opportunities to participate or use several of the gardens. One of the gardens is associated with the ambassador's office, another with another in a kind of private area of the building, and several of them are very public parts of the building that you can access. And in this particular case, like two others, you can actually go outside and be outside in the elements, even though you're still within part of the building, because every time you go in and out of these buildings, you have to be screened. So people sometimes come in there at 8:30 in the morning and don't leave until 10 o'clock at night. So this view along 9 Elms, post the building being completed, shows the sort of dynamic nature of the facade briefly. But then I just wanted to show you Mark Bradford, who created this 3-story mural, installing that in the building, in the main gathering lobby of the structure. Ultimately that facade, you don't know whether or not, when you're making architecture, you hope it's good. But it's the critics and it's the historians that really judge whether or not it's good or not, and all of the rest of you, of course. But when you get an opportunity to have your work published and it achieves this kind of recognition, I think it's an important acknowledgement that the hard work that went into this is really about creating a really wonderful piece of abstraction as well that is really about all of the elements of architecture all at once, in that particular image. So flying back from London to St. Louis, I want to take you to Washington University in St. Louis, where we completed a 5-building, 800-car parking garage renewal and remaking of Washington University's front door. And what you see here in the plan is on the south side of this, or the bottom part of this image, is really the art and architecture part of the campus, which is at the forward entrance to the campus, mirrored by the engineering quad on the opposite side, which is everything in that foreground past the sort of north-south line that runs through it, that includes the two pavilions here, which are kind of epaulets on the old main here, is new in the last 30 years. All of this is new in the last 30 years, and all of this here is new within the last 8 years. And there's a section here where this is flat, and then this rises up to meet the old main and the rest of the campus. Again, a Cope and Stewardson project, another Philadelphia architect in St. Louis, master planning the campus along with the Olmsted brothers, working with Michael Ferguson, landscape architects. We took on this precinct down here. The other thing you need to know about Washington University is they've had a long conversation about contemporary buildings versus sort of what I would call neo-traditional buildings on the campus. And they've taken a kind of position of everything from this point that way of being really of the idiom of more of the old main. So while there are contemporary buildings up there, they're generally brick, they're generally, in some cases, highly neo-traditional, and even though they're modern buildings, as is the engineering quad over here, most of the engineering quad, which you'll see in a few of the views in just a minute. We took a very different approach in the foreground here with their permission, which was basically in order to set all of this sort of brick architecture off. There are a couple of Beaux-Arts buildings, limestone Beaux-Arts buildings down here as part of the Fine Arts campus. Two Fumihiko Maki buildings, one of his early buildings in about the early 1960s, bridging those two buildings out of concrete. And then a late 1990s Fumihiko Maki building, which was actually turned its back on the axis with the entrance on this side and off the parking lot here, that had to be renewed with a new front in the foreground here. So this was the former 800-car parking lot. This is what destroys campuses all over the United States, everywhere. And the chancellor had the vision that if they created an underground parking structure under this precinct someplace, accessed off of the two side roads here, they could restore this campus all the way to the park, by turning what is an arboretum into an arboretum all the way out to the main avenue and to the park. And so all of this was removed, and then those became the building sites going forward. So here you see some of that neo-traditional, neo-Gothic architecture making the engineering building, which the dean of the art and architecture school did not want very vehemently, and definitely wanted a much more contemporary outcome over here. The two Beaux-Arts buildings here, Fumihiko Maki in the middle, bridging that. And then our buildings, along with Moore Rudell doing another engineering building here across from the art and architecture building along the main axis of the renewal. So this is a glimpse of the kind of epaulets that are in the foreground of the old main. This was part of the 1904 St. Louis Exposition, designed for the Corps of Engineers, and then ultimately turned over to Washington University in St. Louis. And the other sort of epaulette, if you will, a kind of tall one-story building with 2 stories below grade, connecting to the parking structure with uses below. This is admissions and financial aid, and the other is a cafe and the environmental program. So here you see the cafe, here bringing obviously people now rather than cars to the center of campus and really engaging that landscape. You get into the underground garage through 2 entrances on either side, off of the side avenues through these entrance ramps going down with the kind of pedal-like walls. The financial aid and admissions buildings right here, and then Weil Hall sits on the mall, on the axis, in front of Givens, one of the old limestone Beaux-Arts building, which also houses undergraduate architecture. So here you see a view from the axis looking back toward Fumihiko Maki through the gap. There were desire lines drawn in the master plan through all of this to create kind of zones of both bikeway and pathway for pedestrians, but creating a kind of calm series of outside interstices or gaps in the landscape that give you a sense of the layers at either end. Weil Hall was imagined as principally an all-glass building to maximize the daylight into the building. It's a LEED Platinum building that has architecture studios facing the axis and the ground floor being administration and research. And then on the opposite side, where we shade much of the solar gain coming into the building and control the light, are painting studios on 2 levels going on that south and west side. The buildings are drawn into those desire lines and pathways. On a glass building, we created the kind of larger, more monumental entrances. I really think that when you enter, I think Steve and I really think that when you enter a university building, there's gravitas when you're grabbing a door that has weight and can be able to patinate, with the life of the people traversing past that particular door. So this stainless steel kind of frame and then the wood all takes on that kind of patinization and that sort of memory of time passing as people move through it. Within the building, there's a living wall that forms part of the interior light court, which all the studios look into, and that becomes a quiet both gathering area for meeting and group gathering, but a way of also gaining light deep into the building and across all the studios. And then, of course, I'm not trying to rub. You have a beautiful new building across the street. This is probably a little bit of a critique of the building that we, learned to design in here at Meyerson. But the idea that there's space and there's places to work and room to move and critique, and yet connected deeply to the university's history is very much a part of being in those studio spaces and the crit spaces as well, which have doors that open out onto plazas so they can roll models in and out of these crit spaces. And then just a kind of elevational tableau of the curtain wall and the back entrance, and the view of the fins that control the light, along with the occluded glass that forms part of the curtain wall around Weil Hall. So taking you from St. Louis then to New York, I want to briefly show you one of our largest, the largest building that we've done. We've done larger, multi-building projects, but this particular 750,000 square foot campus within a campus at NYU was designed to maximize the amount of available land that NYU owned on the site of a former one-story gym at Houston and Mercer Streets in southern Manhattan. The NYU campus is sort of up off the top of the slide here. And the program for this building, we've been talking a little bit about this in our own studio, about unpacking programs. This is all the program going into the building. And every one of these boxes here is dimensioned in a generic way to the volume and the area of those particular program elements. And you can see why this is a campus within a campus. There are 55 general classrooms, 4 performing arts spaces, including 1 full fly theater tower in this building, multiple music practice spaces and recital halls, full NCAA athletics, including courts and pools and squash courts, faculty housing, roughly 35 to 40 market rate housing in a tower, 400 beds of student housing, and so forth and so on, and then the support spaces as well. When we began diagramming this building, it really became apparent that the organization and the wayfinding in such a large building would become hypercritical to really how we might think about anybody using the building. And so we looked at a bunch of different concepts iteratively. These were 2 that stood out, one being what we called sort of avenues and streets, the other one being what we called a connected commons. And the difference between these 2 was that the avenue and streets was not, believe it or not really any more efficient than the connected commons, but what it did was put all the circulation to the interior of the building, which meant that anybody moving into the building would always be moving to the middle of the building and then back out to the edges. And if we had program controlling the outside facade of the building through blinds going up and down and occlusion and all of that, we couldn't make the relationship between the New York urban street grid and the use of this building in real time, that students spend almost 40% of their time while they're in this building in the common areas of the building rather than in the academic areas. So the connected commons became the working diagram, which basically put all the circulation at the perimeter of the building right up against the glass wall, because we could control the light into the classrooms and into the performance spaces, and then allow the connected commons to look out to either side of the street. This just gives you the nature of the complexity of dealing with 750,000 square feet of mixed-use space in urban New York. The housing is up on top of a podium, and then the podium becomes this kind of Rubik's Cube of relationships of space, but we're organized into zones so that the music end of the building for Tisch and the general classrooms of the building were at different sectors of the building. A view from Houston Street in the early evening. I'll talk a little bit about the facade in just a minute, but the podium, because the circulation is out at the edge, is always lit. And so people can see into the building and see people moving within the building all the way around the building, but also the people in the building can then participate, be very much connected to the street. In unpacking this facade, we really needed to understand Jane Jacobs' neighborhood. And the neighborhood down there is a collection of, a variety of buildings, from terracotta to brick to cast iron to a variety of other materials. But one conditional element, I would say, arguably is common to all, is that they're quite articulated, they're quite three-dimensional in their depth and their arrangement, and they're quite very much made up of a kind of, in this particular case, about 50% opacity and 50% transparency. while we were changing up that transparency side of the equation to make it more transparent, certainly at least within the podium, one of the things that we needed to do was also control, even though this is an urban building, there are different aspects on this building that get more energy on it than others due to the way light comes through the New York Canyon and hits different parts of the building. And they can skew, obviously, the performance of the building. And so we began to think about manipulating the facade in such a way that we could turn away our glass from where that solar insulation was coming from and put an insulated panel there that gathers that energy and dissipates it rather than bringing it into the building. And so that creates a very kind of rich tapestry of reflection, of inflection, of organization toward the light or away from the light in this particular case. And it had a secondary benefit. Each of these little sort of wedges, if you will, became sort of bays that you could get past the plane of the building and see up and down the street. And that became very important, which you'll see in the student housing in just a moment. So the public spaces are all on the ground floor. You come in from Houston Street or from the north side of the building into a couple of entry areas past security, and then are taken up or down a series of stairs that also parallel the outside, which you can see at the left of the image there. And they take you up to a series of other smaller intersecting lobbies that serve other programs like the Tisch School and several of the Steinhardt and several of the other schools as well, so that they have their own addresses within the building. As I mentioned, the performance halls, which are quite big. This is a 400-seat full fly performance hall and an end stage theater that's about 250 seats within the building, a recital hall that we pushed out to the edge of the building and used acoustical, 4 layers of acoustical glass in a space to create a highly controlled acoustical space so that the recitals could happen in the city, not in a room in the city, so that this looks out through a gap between the buildings across the street and very much engages the street down below. And then the students come out of the podium and arrive at a kind of intermediate layer where the transition lobbies for housing occur and their addressing for their mailboxes occurs, but there's also outdoor space on that roof that allows people to leave those common spaces and go out on the roof on a terrace underneath the student housing. The student housing also has those wedges, and we designed and mocked up those wedges in our office in such a way that they could be literally window bays within each of the student rooms. So you can see, if you look closely at this next image, you can see somebody sitting in the window there in a couple of the windows. The whole building is fritted to prevent bird strikes. And I'm glad to say that we don't have any here, that we've had virtually none at the embassy or here. And we take great pride in that after doing a research paper over 15 years ago that really established a kind of criteria for how to handle bird strikes on reflective and all glass buildings. And then, of course, the building contextualizes itself through the reflection of the neighborhood on the wedges going forward. Here it's reflecting the Angelica, but very much subsumes itself into the neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. Steve?
All right. I'm going to close this a little closer to home, the Market Street corridor, very briefly, and then we'll take a few questions. There's a series of projects, a suite of them, along the Market Street corridor that we think demonstrate how project by project you can create urbanism in a city. The first begins at Schuylkill Yards, opposite 30th Street Station. Um, This is what it looked like before. This is a George Howe building, 1950 building, opaque facade, parking lot in front. The park in front of it had already been created. Inside the building, the reason why it was opaque, this is what was inside it. It was where the evening newspaper back in those days, the Bulletin, was printed. We simply just opened that whole facade literally took it down, put up a glass facade, kept the corners of the original Howe building so you could see into it, and it would become a public face to the park in the foreground at the base of 30th Street Station. You can see some details of that facade. Again, there's frit on it. All the frit in this case is newspaper type, frit literally on the glass as pattern. Yeah, the bullet. And you can see the depth of this facade. It's an east-facing facade, but it's literally a head house to the square in front of it. It gives presence to that square and definition to it and life to it. It's completely open at the ground level as well as above to views in and out, and literally introduces Schuylkill Yards. A lot of the buildings along to the right there are now completed and already up. Now moving down Market Street, 2300 Market Street, we worked with a biotech life sciences developer and took two existing buildings that were in the early 20th century automotive manufacturing plants, and we added a 220,000 square foot life sciences center on top of those buildings, literally through the building in the foreground, to retain some of that historic fabric of Market Street, while creating biotech space in the adjacency to all of that central area around 30th Street Station. Moving further down Market Street to base of City Hall. This was a project with Olin. You can see Dilworth Plaza on the left. It was basically two holes carved into the ground outside, steps going up to it and steps going down, totally inaccessible. Our plan on the right, again with Olin, basically just did three things. We leveled the park to the city. There are no steps in it. We created a green boundary around the edge to separate it a little bit from the automotive traffic around the perimeter of it. And then we created entries down into the mass transit hub that exists below it. Basically, the facade of the park is the roof of the mass transit hub in Philadelphia that you can see here. The Broaden Street and Market Street subways are accessible here. The surface trolleys are accessible. You can go across to the regional rail and suburban station, all from here. So it's basically a mass transit hub with a park on top of it. Our idea for the way to go down into the city was a giant glass arc, 180-foot long glass arc that's centered on the tower above the top of City Hall on the west side. I always, by the way, remember Vincent Scully, when I took his History of Modern Architecture course, he was complaining about Penn Station, and he said, "You scuttle into the city like a rat now." And we said, well, if we ever get a chance to do an entrance to a subway system, it's going to be glorious. So this is a light-filled entrance into the subterranean world of the subway system. Lots of life on the plaza. The idea was to create a real front yard to City Hall that could have daily life on it like this and this, as well as host events. You've seen it taken over seasonally for all sorts of things, but it's a good day-to-day park, front yard to City Hall that we like to think helps make it feel more accessible to us all. And it, of course, is a place for huge public celebrations and protests right at the base of City Hall. Lastly, Delaware River waterfront. If you don't mind, I'm going to just keep going and close this out because we got to move here. We got to take some questions.
I can move that pretty fast.
Okay, get up here.
So, after Penn Praxis did an initial study of the Delaware River, zone, we were hired with Olin in 2010, 2012, to design a master plan, imagine a master plan that went along 6 miles of the Delaware River, from Port Richmond down to the southern docks. This was what that area looked like in the late 1940s, early 1950s, before some of those piers started to be removed. And then aside that, our imagination of how the waterfront might be reimagined through not only renewal of some of those buildings and reuse, but also the insertion of other buildings along the way. And the Delaware Waterfront, Riverfront Corporation has been managing that master plan and has already inserted, there's a park designed every mile along the river, connecting each of the neighborhoods in the river wards back to the Delaware River, which had been disconnected from them by I-95 corridor. And that I-95 corridor, ever since it was first proposed in the late 1950s, early 1960s, has been demanded to be covered. The Federal Department of Transportation reneged on the cover back in the early 1960s due to cost issues and so forth. But the master plan imagined for a 14-acre site that connects Front Street, which you can see to the left of the drawing there, the upper left of the drawing, down to the waterfront at the lower right, between Walnut Street and Chestnut Street, just south of Market. And within that, working with Hargraves Associates in New York, Hargraves Jones, we helped them imagine the uses in that particular space and design the infrastructure. And then we were the architects for the pavilion and some of the accessory structures. And we took a position that this architecture looking forward, which will be completed in 2027, 2028, we hope, it's well underway, really needed to embrace all of Philadelphia, not just be the imagination of a couple of tall white male architects, but really think about how this might really engage a very diverse city such as Philadelphia and be open and welcoming, to all of the participants in the city. So this cross-laminated timber building, which will be one of the first in Philadelphia when it's completed, very much forms a kind of, it forms a pavilion, but it creates a kind of a gathering place between a cafe and a series of ancillary uses undercover there that then has been well appreciated for how it performs in terms of both its building functions and its uses to be a LEED Platinum project, and will ultimately, we think, become one of the kind of iconic moments in Philadelphia for people to say, meet me at, in this particular case, this underside of the bell, if you will, kind of canopy that forms part of the pass-through in the pavilion. And then this pavilion sits, kind of resting at the knoll of the park, right in the center, a place to gather and enjoy what will ultimately become, we think, the best sixth square in Philadelphia. And with that, I did finish quickly, and we'll take a few questions. We know we're late, but we'll blame a little bit of that on the wonderful introduction by Fritz. So, one or two questions? Seeing none, we'll go to dinner. Oh.
Seeing as you guys were trained as architects here in Philadelphia, your office is here, and you also do projects in the city. I'm curious if you feel that the city has shaped your view of architecture, the way you practice, or if it's had an impact on you that has sort of given you a unique perspective.
Yes, very much so, in a word. We continue to really thrive in the place in which we live, and it continues to impact how we think about the world every day. I think one of the reasons why half our work is in and around existing buildings is because we're in a city with 350 years worth of history around us, and we need to take care of it and own it. And yes, in a word, I mean, everything about the city contributes to the life of our practice and how we think.
Not to mention the legacy of all the architects that have come before us. When we came to school here, we very much wanted to be, in that, learn from that mix. Whether we became part of that mix is, again, for the theoreticians and the historians and everybody else. But, the whole notion of being in that legacy really is one of the assets about coming to Penn and to this architecture school and to the urban design department, the landscape department, because there's a rich history in all of those departments of really, strong practitioners in Philadelphia also teaching here, but also the school being very much a part of the conversation about the making of the city. Yes.
Thank you. So you've done a lot around sustainability and kind of pushing a lot of that work forward in architecture. Is there any sort of material methodology systems that you've been really eager to apply or that you've dreamt about applying into your work that you just have not yet had the chance to?
Well, let me...
Yeah, go ahead. We both have one.
Yeah, I think on every project we ask ourselves, where can we go next? And what's still left to explore and uncover. But we don't know what those are until we actually encounter them. You got to have the problem before you can speculate on things you'd really want to do. In a lot of ways in our world, they come out of the circumstances of doing it rather than being necessarily imagined in advance. And that's partly because that's what we do. We're architects. We make buildings and we figure out what we actually did later on, But, we try to be open to prospects with everything we undertake to do it better and advance the profession, and the world around us.
I'll let that suffice.
Thank you.
One last question, if there is one. One right there. Yep.
Hi, Thank you so much for the lecture. A lot of people tend to say that maybe working with your friends is not always like the best idea. However, you seem to prove otherwise. What advice would you get to choosing like a partner in crime, if you wish, to start a practice? How do you pick one?
Repeat the last piece of that.
Yes. What advice would you give to choosing a partner for a long career in architecture? How do you make that choice? What is important in that person?
Let me start this.
Oh, you're gonna start it again?
I'm going to start this one again. Choose somebody that is not like you at all in terms of personality and approach to the world. I have the same advice, by the way, for marriages. So, we cannot imagine doing what we do alone and haven't been able to ever really imagine it. And practice today is so complicated and so complex, and the volume of knowledge you need to gain control over is so vast that we can just cover a lot more ground as two people than one. And frankly, like everybody, we get on tracks that just aren't going anywhere, and being critics constantly, and thoughtful critics, constructive critics, is something you can get out of a partnership that you can't get as a solo practitioner.
Brief answer. The corollary to his axiom, two things: trust and a sense of humor. If that other person doesn't have either of those things, you're in trouble. If they only have one, you're still in trouble. Because trust will only get you so far, and the sense of humor will only get you the other part. So you need both, along with what he said. Thank you all very much.